Hello guys, and welcome back to another video. We are back working on my BMW 130i and we're back working on the N52 engine. Now today we are going to be doing the rocker cover gasket, or valve cover gasket as it's commonly known as. And it is a pretty common issue on the N52 to suffer from an oil leak. Now my car, is 15 years old. It has covered 128,000 miles, so it is to be expected, to be honest. Now then, it is to be noted that I do have the earlier magnesium valve cover N52 engine, and so if you do have the later plastic valve cover N52 engine, then the process is going to be slightly different. But the main premise, is pretty much the same. So then, to do this job, obviously you're going to need the valve cover gasket itself. I have opted for the L-ring gasket, and I generally like to go with L-ring. They make good quality OEM gaskets. I'm also going to be swapping out the Valvetronic motor seal as well, which is this thing just here. It's worth changing this when you are removing the valve cover. And of course we have some new valve cover bolts as well. Now it is to be noted, these are aluminium, so they are one-time use only, so whenever you remove and replace your valve cover, it is always worth replacing the bolts as well. Now then, without further ado, let's get the car inside and let's get cracking. Okay then, so here we are. Here is the N52 engine then. So to access the valve cover itself, obviously we have to remove a whole bunch of things first. So the cabin air filter box, the scuttle panel, the engine cover itself, and then various other things as well. But this video is going to be a step-by-step guide on how to replace the valve cover gasket. So just watch along patiently and I'm sure we'll get the job done. Okay then, so first thing is first, obviously we want to remove the cabin air filter box and the scuttle panel. First thing I'm going to do then is just disconnect the two sensors. One is for the AUC sensor, the other is for the bonnet release. And I'm just going to actually unclip these from the scuttle panel themselves and just put them down to one side. Then I'm just going to remove the two trim panels at the side, which covers the brake servo. There's this one on this side as well. They just don't clip off. Then we have some 8mm screws that hold the cabin air filter box to the windscreen wiper shroud. So I'm just going to remove them. I'm actually missing a couple. I only have two holding this in. I'm just going to remove them now. And now if we take a look on either side of the scuttle panel, we should see another 8mm bolt. So there's one there and one there as well. Once we've removed them, the scuttle panel and the cabin air filter box should then be able to be removed. And now that we have both of those 8mm bolts removed from the side of the scuttle panel, this should now be loose, but obviously we still have some cables running across here, so I'm just going to pop this up just to free these. We don't want to go and end up snapping some of these. There we go, that's all them removed. Now this entire scuttle panel should now just pull away. There we are. Next thing we want to do then is remove the strut brace, or one side of it. We only need to remove this side. So it is just bolted in there. And then there's also one bolt that holds the two sections together just behind that cap there. And now these two bolts are different sizes. So the one in the middle takes an E18 socket. Get that removed with the magnet. There's that bolt just here. And then this bolt here takes an E14 socket. And there's that bolt removed. And now this section of the strut brace can now just be removed. Just have to pull it out. Like so. And with that removed, I could actually now gain access to the valve cover itself, but you can see we still have all these cables running across, and I want to give myself as much space and as best access as possible. So I'm actually just going to work on disconnecting all these from this side, then I can just fold it all over, remove the engine cover, and then we'll have access to the valve cover itself with plenty of space to work with. Okay then, so we have everything now disconnected that we can disconnect. So we have the vacuum pipe here. You just have to push this white clip down and then this just pulls out, so we can now put that over to one side. And we have the two positive cables as well. One is held in by a 13mm nut, this one, and this is held in by a 10mm nut. Now it is to be noted that I have already disconnected the battery because I don't want these shorting out on anything, but obviously with these now disconnected they can go over to one side as well. And obviously all that's left is these two connectors here. I believe one of them goes to the Valvetronic motor and the other goes to the coil packs. Could be wrong, but now we can go ahead and remove the engine cover itself, which isn't actually held in by these Torx bolts. That is just for show. This just lifts up like so. Just held in by a couple of tabs. There we are, that's that removed. Okay then, so now that we have the engine cover removed, we have the positive cables and this vacuum pipe out of the way. I just tucked it up there so it's now out of the way. We can now see the valve cover, and as you can see there is quite a lot of oil on the top of this thing, but I think majority of this is actually just from in the past people have spilt the oil when refilling and it's just gone under here and it's never ever been cleaned up. Now there is a little bit of oil around the eccentric shaft sensor as well, but I don't think this seal is actually leaking. Now if it is, we can obviously replace this at a later stage. This is very easy, you know, to access. All we need to do is pop the connector off and then we can just pop this out anytime. We don't need to remove the whole valve cover to replace this, so that's the reason that I haven't chose to do so at this stage. But obviously with the gasket that we are going to be replacing is this gasket just here, and also the Valvetronic motor gasket just there as well. It makes sense to do at least both of these because of course we are going to be removing the Valvetronic motor, so it just makes sense to replace the gasket while we're in there. So now what we need to do then is start disconnecting these coil packs and unbolting these ground cables, and so we can get this entire branch over to one side and then we can have access to all of the bolts that hold the valve cover in place. Okay then, so I've actually went ahead and disconnected all of the ignition coils. Very easy to do. So all you need to do is lift this tab up and this connector should then slide out. So I've done that to all 6 ignition coils. Now what I'm going to do is remove these bolts here that holds this entire branch in place. So it takes an E10 socket. Shouldn't be very tight at all. So now that we have those bolts removed, then this branch is now pretty loose, but we still need to disconnect a few things. We need to disconnect the Valvetronic motor, which is this connector just here. So there's that removed, and then there is also the eccentric shaft sensor as well, and there is that removed. Now then, what I've actually done, and this is not necessary to do so just to remove the valve cover, but I've actually disconnected this wiring harness from the ECU box just so I can put it over to one side. I'll have much better access to get the camera in here, and it allow me to have much better space to work with as well. So now that we have this wiring harness out of the way, then I can now start removing the ignition coils, the Valvetronic motor, and I'm actually going to unbolt the injector rail as well because I'm going to struggle to get onto these bolts here. So I believe there is just 3 10mm bolts along there, and that means the injectors can then be put over to one side and should be able to access all of these bolts then. And I think after that, all that we need to remove is this CCV breather pipe at the back here that just unclips from the valve cover itself, and then I think it should be ready for removal. Sorry, I lied, there's actually 4 bolts that hold the injector rail in place. So it's these 10mm bolts here. So now that those bolts have been removed, the injector rail should pull out of the cylinder head. Okay then, so the injectors themselves kind of seem a little bit stuck, but turns out they actually don't even need to remove the fuel rail and injectors, because I've went ahead and removed the bolts. It's actually just gave me the perfect room to be able to get a socket and an extension down into the gap, so I can get on to all of the bolts now. And it means that I don't have to remove the injectors and, you know, spill fuel everywhere. Now what I'm going to do is remove all of the ignition coils. They may be a little bit stuck, but with a little bit of a wiggle and a pull, they should remove just like so. Okay then, so we can see we have all 6 ignition coils now removed. We can see we have one odd one out. That's because one has been replaced for a Bosch replacement. The others are Bosch, but they're BMW from factory. I don't see why only one has been replaced. I'm guessing they had a misfire issue, but yeah, we'll at some point be swapping out all the ignition coils anyway for some nice new ones along with the spark plugs. Now that we have the ignition coils out of the way, then we can get started on the Valvetronic motor. There's a bunch of bolts holding it in place. So there's 1, 2, 3 and 4. Now you don't just go ahead and remove the bolts on this thing because it is spring loaded. What we need to do, we actually need to insert an Allen key into the end there, and we need to rotate it clockwise to put this thing into service mode. I see so many people just remove the bolts and then this thing ends up springing out, and you can actually end up damaging the Valvetronic motor that way. You need to put this thing into service mode before you remove it. Now then, when it comes to putting the Valvetronic motor into the service position, all you need to do is use a 4mm Allen key or a 4mm Allen bit in that hole, and then just rotate it clockwise. And you're going to want to do that until you feel tension. It should get tight. There we are. And now then, it's time to start removing the bolts that holds the Valvetronic motor in place. So I've already went ahead and removed this one. So there is obviously a Torx on either side that holds the bracket in place, but because you can't actually gain access to them with the Valvetronic motor still in place, it's much easier just to remove the one that goes through the middle, which is on this side. But now I can start removing these bolts that bolts the Valvetronic motor into its seal here. And you can just wind these out by hand now. And there's 2. And now what we can actually do is insert our 4mm again, and now we need to rotate this anti-clockwise, and we should start noticing the Valvetronic motor is being pushed out. As you can see, it's been pushed out, and we should now be able to remove it. Careful, there we are. So Valvetronic motor removed. And with the Valvetronic motor removed, then I actually went ahead and removed this crankcase breather hose at the rear here. Do not ask me how I managed to remove this. Access is absolutely terrible behind here. You are supposed to push in these clips and then you're supposed to just push it off, but yeah, easier said than done, that is for sure. Now I ended up actually breaking part of the part of this clip. It's not a big deal. I will be replacing the whole crankcase ventilation system at a later date, but yeah, I managed to just sort of wedge a screwdriver in, then wiggle it around, and yeah, I managed to slide this thing off. But yeah, glad that's removed now, and I should actually have access to all of the bolts around the outside of the rocker cover now. Now then, it's time to start removing all of the bolts. There should be 19 around the perimeter and then 3 in the middle, equaling 22, and they take an E10 socket. Yeah, I don't think these bolts are going to come out easy. That's that one loose though. That She removed it. There we are. First one. That's 2. 3. That's 4 removed. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, I think, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, and 22. Okay then, so now with all of the bolts removed, it's time to start removing the rocker cover itself. Now I am going to take my time because I have a feeling that this might be pretty stuck. Obviously we don't have complete clear access, so we don't want to, you know, end up snapping anything. But yeah, I'm just going to take my time. There is some oil in here as well, which I don't want to spill. So yeah, we're just going to take our time with this really. Okay, here goes. Okay then, so as you can see, we now have the complete wiring loom over to one side, out of the way of the rocker cover completely. I did have to disconnect a few more things, so there was one Vanos solenoid, I believe, the camshaft position sensor, the water pump thermostat, there was a ground cable, and I also went ahead and removed this hard plastic trim piece at the back as well. I noticed it was catching at the rear there, so I now should, in theory, have good clearance to remove this rocker cover. So here goes. Finally. Oh, that wasn't a good idea. I shouldn't have tipped it upside down. Let's get this away from the car. Okay then, so we have the rocker cover removed now, and on first inspection, doesn't look too bad underneath here. I mean, I noticed there is quite a bit of sludge build up on these springs here. I could actually see that through the oil filler cap, so that is no surprise really. But yeah, nothing too bad, you know, it doesn't look too gunked up in here. You know, I've definitely seen a lot worse than this, so yeah, overall pretty happy. The cam lobes don't seem too scored at all, so yeah, generally pretty happy to be honest. But let's get this gasket, well, let's get both of these gaskets removed, because obviously there's one that goes on the perimeter, then there's this one that runs in the middle, and yeah, let's start cleaning up. Okay then, so now that the original gaskets are removed, it's now time to start the cleanup process. Now I think to begin with, I'm just going to try and remove as much sludge build-up as possible. And obviously there's no point going too crazy, because we're not going to get things spotless unless we, you know, disassemble the entire cylinder head. But we can try and do our best to remove any large, you know, clunks of carbon build-up and whatever else. So yeah, let's see how it comes out anyway. Okay then, so here is how we are looking after a good clean. I've gave all of the mating surfaces a good clean with some brake cleaner. I gave the eccentric shaft sensor a good clean out with some electrical contact cleaner. And yeah, I'm pretty happy that we can now go ahead and install the new gasket with the rocker cover. But first, we need to go ahead and get this thing cleaned up both inside and out. And now then, it's time to install our new gasket. So I'm just going to be careful dropping this over. I don't want to particularly bend it if I don't need to. Just going to line it up with the dowels. So here's how we're looking then. New gaskets are on. Seated nicely. You can't really get it wrong. There is dowels to help you locate them. And now it's time to reinstall the rocker cover then, after I've given it a good clean. Now like I said, you know, we're not going for perfection, we're just trying to get rid of the majority of that carbon buildup, and yeah, haven't done too bad of a job. So let's get this thing reinstalled. looks good to me. We're fully seated. Nothing trapped. That look good. Let's start installing our bolts, and then we can start tightening this thing down. Okay, so we have some brand new Victorines bolts, so let's get installing these. Like I said, there is 22 in total. Okay, so I'm going to do the middle 3 first. They are slightly different. They have this elongated washer on, so I'm just going to drop them into position. And we can start dropping the perimeter ones into place. Okay, so now we have all of our new bolts in position. I'm just going to go ahead and nip them down, and then we will start the torquing sequence. Okay, so when it comes to torquing down the bolts, then essentially you want to start in the middle and then spiral outwards. Obviously we have 3 bolts in the middle, so we want to do them first, and then we will alternate either side and work our way outwards until obviously all of them are torqued down. Now they need to be torqued down to 7 Newton meters, which obviously is not a lot, and then you have to wait around 30 minutes or so just for them to settle essentially, and then what you want to do is another 90-degree turn, then you will have your final torque setting then. So yeah, like I said, we will start in the middle on the first bolt. I'm going to torque down to 7 Newton meters. There we go then, that is all 22 bolts torqued down to 7 Newton meters. Now in theory I have to wait 30 minutes or so just so they can settle, and then I'll go back and retorque them all again another 90 degrees. And while we're waiting then, we may as well go ahead and install our new Valvetronic motor seal. So that should just push in. And there we go then, that's the new seal installed. Okay then, so I've waited 30 minutes or so now, and it's time to torque down the bolts to the final torque setting. So I've just got to do an extra 90-degree turn, which is a quarter of a turn. So that's what I'm going to do now. Still in the same orientation, start in the middle and spiral outwards. And there we go then, that's all 22 bolts fully torqued down to 7 Newton meters plus a 90-degree turn. And now then, it's just going to be a case of putting everything back. So we're going to start with the wiring loom, putting that all back, you know, channeling that down to the water pump, the thermostat, and then obviously we have the Vanos solenoids, things like that. So we need to just get everything plugged back in, everything back in its place, and then we'll see how we're looking. Okay, quick little update then. I have reinstalled the crankcase breather pipe at the back, reinstalled this hard plastic trim piece. I have rerouted all of the sensors that go to the bottom, so we have a couple that go to the Vanos solenoids, and we have the ones that go to the water pump, the thermostat, and then there's like a ground cable as well. That is all in the correct orientation. I've put the bolts back in for the fuel rail, and yeah, now it's time to reinstall the ignition coils. So there really is no order, to be honest, with the ignition coils. They're all the same part number, but I am, just for the sake of it, I'm just going to be putting them back in the same order. Doesn't hurt to. Yeah, that's all the ignition coils back in. Now I can reinstall this wiring loom branch back onto the rocker cover as well. Oh, still need to reinstall the Valvetronic motor as well. Let's do that first. Let's do that while we have this out of the way, just to give us a little bit more space. Yeah, let's get that installed now. Okay then, so let's line it up. Yeah, it's gone in fairly easy. I've actually went ahead and removed these two ignition coils. You don't need to, but it just gives you a little bit better access to get a socket onto these bolts here. So I'm just going to reinstall these two, and then obviously there is the one at the bottom as well. Okay then, so that is the Valvetronic motor reinstalled. I've actually went ahead and reinstalled the two ignition coils as well. Now it's just going to be a case of getting everything put back together, and I will check in with you when we are finally done. Okay then, so I've actually reassembled everything that I believe I need to get the engine started. Obviously I want to try and fire it up, make sure it does fire up, you know, make sure I haven't left any earth connections unplugged, and just make sure there's no leaks first and foremost. So yeah, I'm not going to put the cowling back until I know that it runs and I know that I have no leaks. So yeah, moment of truth coming up. We have some smoke. Okay, so we have some smoke, and I kind of thought it was just excess oil that has dripped on the exhaust, but yeah, it kind of smells like, oh no, I can see it. I was going to say it kind of smells like rubber, but I can see a couple of drops of oil on the exhaust, which yeah, it's nothing major. We'll fire it up again anyway. And since we knew that the engine fired up with no issues, then I went ahead and reinstalled everything back to how it should be. So the engine cover, cabin air filter box, the cowling, and everything is now back to how it should be. So that is pretty much job done now. Okay then, so that is another job done on the N52 engine then. That is the rocker cover gaskets replaced. I'm glad this is done now, because it's one of the final last big jobs that I have left to do on the N52 engine. I still have the crankcase ventilation system to replace, you know, the breather block and all the hoses that go with it as well, and also plan on replacing the water pump and the thermostat at some point as well. So stay tuned for those videos in the near future. I want to thank all of you guys for watching. Please remember to give this video a like, leave a comment down below, subscribe if you have not already done so, and I will see you all in that next one. Peace!